Shades, the creepy Roswell books. All right, Shades, Chapter 1. Pale lightning, the color of splintered bone, tore jagged streaks in the dark night sky. Thunder pealed, still a little distant, but definitely growing closer. Lying on his back on top of his sleeping bag near the campfire, Michael Guerin stared up at the swirling storm clouds. Excitement coursed through him, and surprisingly, the sensation felt good. That was a lot. Usually, given the secrets he held, excitement was a bad thing. Hey, Guerin. What? Michael asked, not bothering to look at the speaker and resenting the interruption. What are you grinning about? Didn't know I was. Well, you are, and I think it's about time you stopped. Getting caught by a storm out here wasn't exactly something most folks want to do. Sure, Michael adjusted his lace fingers behind his head and tried not to look so cheerful. That morning, he'd been glum and taciturn. Taciturn had been a word Doggett had used. The word wasn't one Michael had ever used or intended to use, except maybe on a test in school, now that he decided to carry on with getting an education. The lightning sparked again, threading the sky with spidery shafts. The air mass over the desert floor shifted, dropping at least 5 degrees. Going to be a cold night tonight, Junior said. Maybe you should have brought your flannels, Flynn suggested. Where Junior was narrow-shouldered and short, Flynn Boyd was big and burly and outspoken and rude. Flynn was one of those reserve backs on the high school football team. Michael didn't hang with either of those guys back in school, but the summer had conspired to bring them all together. All of them had been hired by Kurt Bulmer, a local geologist, to help survey the tracts of land outside Roswell, where they camped outside less than an hour ago. The loud detonation of thunder sounded almost overhead. The sudden gust of wind that followed the crash gave the impression of a cannon having gone off nearby and dusted the campsite with a blowback that carried a spray of sand. The dome test quavered under the onslaught, then once more looked like a gaily colored toadstools bubbling up from the harsh broken ground. Michael couldn't help himself. He grinned. The others were freaking, and he felt more alive than ever. I'm free, Michael thought contentedly. No arguments with Maria for the next couple of days. No questions about what I'm going to do with myself. No discussions of responsibility. Of course, that freedom couldn't last. There was still a schedule at the Crashdown Cafe to return in a couple of days when the surveying gig petered out. School had ended for the summer only a few days ago, and so had his chance to return home to his home world. Tess had gone, though, and she'd taken Max's baby. But Michael supposed he was pretty okay with that, even though Tess's betrayal and murder of Alex still caused his stomach to knot up every time he thought about it. Max wasn't ready to be a dad no matter what he thought, but Tess wasn't the answer to that problem, and Michael still wanted Tess to pay for what she had done to all of them. To Michael's way of thinking, there was always plenty of time for Max to play dad later. It would be tough dealing with Max till he accepted that, but hiding out in a small town while not being quite human was pretty tough too. Michael was all about tough living. Lightning flared again, followed immediately by the sudden crash of thunder. Tents can leak, Junior grumbled. Nah, Flynn replied. Moisture passes right through tent walls, Junior argued. Only if you touch the tent wall while it's raining, numbskull, Flynn retorted. Just don't lean up against the tent after the rain starts. And if I roll over against the tent wall while I'm sleeping? No prob, Flynn said. I'll just zip you up in your sleeping bag nice and tight. Kurt's got plenty of duct tape in the gear we brought. 2 of the other guys at the camp started to laugh. Junior cursed them all. For a guy who knew big words, Michael decided, Junior pretty much knew how to talk trash with the best of them. Gathering himself with a lithe move, Michael spun around and sat on the sleeping bag, roping his arms around his knees while he stared at the 2 verbal combatants. Hey, Bert and Ernie, he said. Flynn glared at Michael while Junior joined in with a reproachful look. Hostility and guilt all mixed into one convenient little package, Michael thought. Could be daunting, guys, but Maria's got you both beat. What? Flynn snarled. Bored? Michael asked. He wore a dust-streaked t-shirt and jeans. Baths were a couple days off after they returned to civilization. Maria couldn't have handled the rough living, but the hardship was cake to Michael. What are you talking about? Flynn asked suspiciously. Michael stared out across the campsite, knowing he had the attention of the other 4 guys on the work crew. All of them had gathered around the bonfire in the middle of the campsite. Only a short distance away, Kurt Bulmer sat in his private dome tent and worked his notebook computer by the light of an electric lantern. Tiller and Perry rounded out the work crew. Tiller was just a guy Michael had passed in the halls, somebody spending time in the institution to get to the next phase of his life. Last year, Tiller had dropped out of school after his ex-Navy father had committed suicide, deciding to work to help out his mom and 3 younger sisters. Perry was a gamer who was so geeky he didn't even fit in with the brainiacs like Junior and his friends. As usual, he wore sunglasses even at night and a black t-shirt with a nearly naked anime babe wielding a sword and pistol. Seated only a short distance away, cross-legged, Perry unconsciously shuffled cards from a collectible card game he and the other gamers played at school and at the Crashdown.
We're all bored, Michael explained. He glanced up at the lightning-streaked heavens. So far they'd been lucky and the rain had held off. It's night, but the time's what? Maybe 9 o'clock? Way before our usual bedtimes, and we don't have anything to do. Probably not before Junior's bedtime, Flynn said, drawing a scathing retort from Junior. Michael took a deep breath and reached for what little patience he had remaining. I was just thinking that maybe we should figure out something to do. Perry shuffled his cards suggestively. No one took him up on the unspoken offer. I know, Junior said, scrambling for his backpack. He pulled out a couple library books. Further searching, turned up a small flashlight. He shoved the flashlight under his chin and turned the beam on. The golden light played across the planes of his face, turning his eyes into cavernous hollows. You're a pumpkin? Flynn asked. Do you want to play Halloween? No, you precious moron, Junior said in disgust. Flynn stood up, rising to his full, impressive height. Talking like that is going to get you thumped. Junior flicked the flashlight off as if trying to vanish into the night shadows. Flynn, crush, Perry said, laughing derisively. Flynn, destroy. Flynn shot Perry a venomous glare. I get done here. I got plenty left over for you, geek. Not Halloween, Michael said, trying to bring the conversation back to the subject of distraction rather than destruction. Ghost stories. Junior flicked the flashlight on again, highlighting his face once more. Wahaha, he bellowed. Despite his rough and ready act, Flynn was startled and jumped back at the outburst. The instinctive retreat caused Perry and Tiller to laugh. Michael grinned wider, but really wasn't looking forward to ghost stories, which he considered almost as boring as the argument between Flynn and Junior. Still, he was glad someone had thought of something to do. Think you can handle it, Flynn? Perry taunted. How many times have you been out in this part of the desert? They got all kinds of spooky things supposed to be rambling around out here. Tiller joined in, obviously enjoying the challenge of rattling Flynn. The Mesoliko Indians believed in shape-changing monsters with a taste for human flesh, and there are all kinds of stories about murders on trail drives and wagon trains rolling into California during the gold rush. He nodded at the hills surrounding the campsite. Maybe you don't know what's really out there. You guys are full of crap, Flynn said. I haven't been scared since I was in diapers. Let's see, Junior mused. That would make it last week? Flynn doubled his fists and started towards Junior. Normally, Michael wouldn't have stepped in because he liked to keep to himself. Instead, he was up and between Flynn and Junior in a heartbeat. Tiller had gotten to his feet as well, but he would have been too late. Flynn glared at Michael. You want some of this, Garen? Michael kept his own hands up, fingers outstretched in a non-threatening way, but he knew he could use his forearms to block anything Flynn tried to throw. Me? He shook his head. Then get out of my way. Can't do that, Michael said. Flynn set himself, ready to punch. Think about it, Michael said. You guys fight, maybe we lose the job. I don't know about you, but I can use the money we're getting paid. He eyed Flynn levelly. Flynn glanced at the tent where Kurt Bulmer still labored. What about it, Flynn? Michael asked. You think maybe a good payday means you can put up with Junior another couple days? Flynn shot a harsh glance over Michael's shoulder. Still gonna kick your butt after we get back to town. Junior laid back, his hands clasped behind his head like the threat was nothing. I'm thinking ghost story, Michael said, not taking his eyes from Flynn. What about you, Tiller? Sure, I got half a bag of marshmallows left. Perry, Michael said, you want to tell the first one? Sure, Perry said, rifling his deck of cards. I got a good one. I call it the Head Eater. Terrific. Sounds like a winner. Michael stared up at Flynn. We okay here? Sure, Flynn said grudgingly. After a final stare, he turned and lumbered back to his sleeping bag. From the corner of his eye, Michael caught Junior making a gesture that would have probably gotten him killed if Flynn had seen him do it. Michael retreated to his own sleeping bag as Perry began his story. This all happened a long time ago, Perry began in a properly creepy voice. 100 years ago, maybe more. Back on the days before the West was settled, only the Mesolito bands roamed the mountains and Alpine valleys out here those days, and they weren't friendly. Doubt stirred within Michael. During the encounters I'd had with River Dog, one of the medicine men of the Mesolito Native American Reservation outside of Roswell, Max had done research on the tribe. The Native American group hadn't been extreme or harsh unless persecuted or threatened in some way. There was this one guy, Perry continued, the tribe kicked out. His true name was soon forgotten by the tribe, or never used again because they considered him less than human. Why'd this guy get kicked out of the tribe? Flynn asked, glaring at Junior. Being some kind of pain in the butt nobody could take anymore? No, Perry said. Head Eater got kicked out of the tribe for the same thing that earned him his nickname. Eating heads? Junior asked in obvious excitement. His eyes danced behind his glasses. Yeah, Perry replied, warming to the story. Cool, Junior said. Even Flynn lost part of the effort he was putting into ignoring the others. Seems Head Eater got stranded in the mountains during one winter, Perry said. He was with a hunting party when a blizzard came. Michael only vaguely paid attention to the story. The tale followed this familiar pattern of every ghost story he'd ever heard. He wasn't surprised by a whole lot of things that were crafted from mechanical artifices. Stories followed certain routes, and he even figured out the trick ending of The Sixth Sense. Figuring out the ending had been okay, but telling Maria had obviously been a bad move. Actually, he still didn't understand what had been so bad about telling her. After all, she'd been dying to know what was really going on. But that had only been until he told her the trick. Then she was mad at him. Again. Perry strung the story out, building up the suspense and the gruesome horror of the grizzly bear that had attacked by the trapped Mesolito Indians and killed them one by one. The story was perfect camp tale fare, and the approaching storm added to the overall effect. Junior and Flynn were bug-eyed as they listened to Perry detail the bloodthirsty attacks by the bear. Tiller kept to himself. Too late, Michael realized that with Tiller's dad committing suicide, ghost stories might not have been the best choice for an evening's entertainment. But there was nothing to do about it now that would make the situation worse by calling attention to it. So Head Eater's been lying there for days, Perry went on, and he's getting hungrier than he's ever been. He starts looking at the dead warriors lying around him, and he starts thinking maybe they wouldn't taste so bad. So he starts a fire. In the middle of a blizzard? Flynn challenged. Perry looked irritated. The blizzard's been over for days. What did he burn? Flynn went on. And if there were any sticks up in the mountains, they'd all be covered by the snow. He found some sticks, okay? Not in no blizzard, Flynn said. Besides, Junior said, it would be better if the heads were raw. Grosser. Michael reached for a nearby bag of marshmallows, took a couple out, and pierced them with the wire cooking utensil he'd used to fix hot dogs earlier. As the marshmallows caught fire, he thought about the way they looked kind of skull-like. He considered telling the others, but decided against it. Okay, Perry said, sighing. The guy ate the heads raw. There he was, his leg all busted up from fighting the grizzly bear. I thought you said it was his arm, Flynn interrupted. Damn, Perry exploded. Will you just let me tell the friggin' story? It's more believable if you get the details right, Junior said. Fine, Perry growled. This guy had a busted arm, and he's just discovered he's got a busted leg. A busted arm, Flynn said doubtfully, and he's rubbing two sticks together that weren't somehow covered over during this blizzard. Hey, I'm just telling this how I heard it, Perry protested. Get back to the head-eating part, Junior said. We're right there with you for that. Michael pulled his marshmallows out of the fire and blew the flames from the toasted brown sides. He waited just for a moment, then popped them into his mouth, tasting the almost too hot, gooey goodness. Perry elaborated on the cannibalism aspects of the story, lingering over the details till Flynn and Junior started to look green in the sudden lightning flashes. The cracking of skulls and scooping out what was inside seemed to do the trick. Across the campfire, Tiller stood and walked off into the brush. Lightning flickered and lit him up in still shots out of the darkness 3 times, then he was gone from sight. In the spring, when he returned to the tribe, Perry said, other warriors traveled to the mountain pass to bury the dead guys, sent them on to the happy hunting ground so their spirits wouldn't get trapped here in this world. So those guys found out what Head Eater had been doing all winter, Flynn said. Perry nodded, but by now his heart clearly wasn't in the story. There were cracked skulls lying around everywhere, looking like shelled pecans. Head Eater tried to pass off what had happened as the work of the grizzly, but the other warriors knew they kicked him out of the tribe. Michael eyed the marshmallow bag, but knew he had enough sweets. He was either going to try to go to sleep and ignore the other guys or raid the cooler for more hot dogs. You know, Flynn said, looking at Junior, I don't think grizzly bears were ever known to hang out in New Mexico. Nope, Junior agreed. I watched a special on them on Discovery a couple nights ago. They always stayed up in the northern and coastal areas. Perry sighed in expiration. Doesn't anyone want to know what happened to Head Eater? He got kicked out of the tribe, Flynn said, then went on to wander around the neighborhood here. He ambushed and kidnapped people from wagon trains in the local settlements. Then he killed them and ate them. Probably left a pile of skulls around, Junior agreed. He died, but since the tribe refused to bury him, his spirit still walks the desert and is still eating people. Perry cursed and flopped back down in his sleeping bag. You guys suck, he said. And before he finished the word, Tiller's panicked scream rang out through the nearby hills, washed away by the sudden peal of thunder. Hey, Flynn said, that was Tiller. Already galvanized into action, Michael, rising from the sleeping bag, peered in the darkness that had surrounded the desert campsite. Shadows stretched away and filled the night in all directions, hardly interrupted at all by the campfire. All right. Okay, Allison, if you want to read chapter 2.
Where did Tiller go? Junior asked anxiously. Kurt Bulmer raced from the tent and stood in front of the open flap. What's going on out there? As Junior tried to explain, Michael grabbed the backpack he'd been saddled with all day. He rummaged inside and came up with a flashlight. Grabbing the flashlight, he ran in the direction of the screams. The downpour that had finally begun stung his eyes and matted his hair and had turned the dry desert floor into muddy slush. Tiller screamed again, but this time the effort was hoarse and racked with pain. Michael played the flashlight beam over the hill in front of him. Scrub brush and cacti clung to the steep hillside. His right foot shot out from under him. He fell to one knee but pushed himself forward again. The hill was steeper on the other side. Michael's tennis shoes tore through the muddy crust, and he slid down, brushing up against a hedgehog cactus that left fiery nettles in his forearm. He ignored the pain and played the flashlight beam over Tiller on the ground before him. Tiller huddled on his knees in the mud. Rainwater ran in rivulets around him, threading through his hands pressed into the mud. He kept his head down and shuddered. Tiller, Michael called, playing the light over the ground and the area around them. Hey, Tiller. Tiller didn't respond except to bury his face in the mud between his hands. What's wrong? Kurt Bulmer called from the top of the rise. Michael had slid down. Michael glanced back up the hill and spotted Bulmer, Jr., Flynn, and Perry standing there. The lightning poured through the sky above their heads, and thunder blasted away Michael's first attempt at a reply. I don't know, Michael said. Bulmer started down the hillside, but lost his balance on the slick mud and fell. He tumbled to the bottom of the hill while the others remained along the ridgeline. Tiller, Michael said, trying to calm the guy with his voice. He released the rock and put his hand on Tiller's shoulder. What is it? What's wrong? It's my dad, Tiller whispered hoarsely, rocking, shuddering, and trying to hold back choked sobs. What about his dad? Bulmer asked, standing nearby. His dad is dead, Michael said. I'm sorry to hear that, Bulmer said, but we need to get him in out of the rain. Hooking an arm under Tiller's, Michael tried to help the guy to his feet. Tiller fought him off, pushing Bulmer away as well. No, Tiller shouted, I can't leave. Why? Bulmer asked. You'll be more comfortable back in one of the tents. My dad, Tiller said. Bulmer hesitated. We'll talk about your dad. My dad, Tiller tried again. My dad doesn't want me to leave. Your dad wouldn't want you to stand around out here, Bulmer stated. Then tell him, Tiller straightened and pointed into the darkness ahead of them. Tell him. Michael didn't see anything. Then gradually an ethereal shape seemed to materialize from the darkness just beyond the touch of the flashlight beam. The figure was vaguely man-shaped, then more details became clearer. The man looked like he'd been covered from head to toe in some kind of silver shimmer, like an image from a black and white film that had been computer-generated onto color film, the way Michael had seen in some commercials. He was tall and broad with a cruel face, tiny eyes, and a wide, hard mouth. The only thing that didn't fit was the short length of rope dangling from the noose around the guy's neck. Do you see it? Michael asked. He had to strain to speak. See what? Junior called down. Michael gestured with the flashlight, noticing how the beam shone through the garish figure and played over the rocks and cacti on the other side. The ghost. Don't see nothing, Flynn said. Michael wanted to turn to Flynn and demanded to know how he couldn't see the ghost. Instead, Michael kept the flashlight beam focused on the sinister image. For the first time, he caught the silvery glints of rain passing through the ghost. I don't either, Bulmer commented. Give me a hand, Garen. I want to get Tiller out of the rain, maybe back to Roswell tonight. No, Tiller shouted, staring forward. Don't you see? My dad wants me to stay here. The figure at the other end of Michael's flashlight beam waved as if to indicate that Tiller should stay. Michael turned to Bulmer. You don't see anything? No. Bulmer struggled to hang on to Tiller, who fought to escape. I don't see anything. Tiller surged in the man's grasp, bellowing out curses, screaming out to his father. Michael helped hold Tiller back, having real difficulty in the muddy water swirling over his feet. As Michael watched the ghost's image, he corrected himself, broke into a run. Sure-footed as a mountain goat, the specter seemed to have no problem at all running across the muddy ground. The hanged man sprinted across the short distance. His feet didn't disturb the water, and whatever noise he made didn't sound over the pealing thunder crashing through the heavens. No, Tiller yelled. Instead of fighting against Bulmer and Michael, he suddenly reversed his efforts and tried to flee. Bulmer barely kept his footing, and Michael dropped to one knee, feeling the mud close around him. In the next instant, the ghost slammed into Tiller and Michael at the same time. A bolt of lightning smacked the ground near them. A blinding moment of pain passed through Michael. He felt Tiller ripped from his hands, but that wasn't his main concern, because he suddenly fell backward, blown by some arcane force, and landed in the cold mud. Time returned to Michael in a rush. He actually felt his heart start again, feeling like the beat had been primed with a stick of dynamite or TNT. Just lie still, Bulmer was saying. Michael pushed the man's hands away. I'm okay. He glanced down at Tiller as he pushed himself to a seated position. How is he? Out, Bulmer said. He laid a hand at the side of Tiller's neck. He's got a strong pulse. Even as Bulmer spoke, Tiller groaned and his eyes flickered open. Did you see it? Tiller asked. The lightning that hit the ground? Bulmer asked. Michael gazed silently at the football-sized crater that had opened in the ground. He tried not to think about what would have happened to them if the bolt had struck them with all the water around. Not that, Tiller said. The ghost, my father's ghost. Bulmer shook his head. That wasn't a ghost, Tiller. That was just lightning that came way too close. No, Tiller argued. I saw my father's ghost. Michael found the flashlight he'd been holding till the incredible force slammed into him. He'd shown the beam in all directions, but there was no sign of the image. Give me a hand, Bulmer said. Let's get Tiller to Roswell and let someone in the ER take a look at him. No, Tiller objected, shaking them off. I'm not going to the ER. I'm fine. I saw what I saw. He started to say more, but he caught himself and stopped. I saw what I saw. His voice was low and quavering. Emotion lighted his eyes. Without another word, he turned and walked back through the rain and over the muddy ground toward the camp. Bulmer pointed his heavy-duty lantern at the ground. He held the beam steady for a moment, studying the crater. The halogen light reflected from the gathering water. Did you see anything? Bulmer asked. Michael stared into the emptiness where the light stripped the shadows away. Only hard rock covered with running water met his gaze. Whatever Michael had seen was gone, and whatever it had been had gone unseen by the others. He had to think about that. His alien nature gave him different senses and powers than humans. He still didn't know their full extent. But what he did know was one of the first lessons he'd learned. He couldn't come across as different. Anonymity meant safety. He snapped off the flashlight and looked at Bulmer. No, I didn't see anything. As he turned and trudged up the hill, Michael also hoped he never saw the specter again. Max Evans pulled the rented 71 Oldsmobile Cutlass to a stop outside the Mesalico Native American Reservation. After the Jeep had blown up, he had needed wheels again. For the moment, the rented Cutlass fit the bill. He watched the people moving through the village while the yellow dust cloud he'd brought in with him dissipated. The sun beat down on the land, already hot, though it was only mid-morning. He couldn't believe he was just sitting behind the wheel. The Mesalico people watching him probably thought he was bored or lost. And maybe he was lost. Ever since Tess had left with the baby, his son, there had been an emptiness inside him that he'd never before experienced. Max peered at his reflection in the dust-streaked windshield. I set my son would do. All his life in school, he'd struggled not to get involved with others, to maintain his own personal bubble of individuality. Getting caught up in the lives of others put him at risk because he was different. He'd always known he was different, he just hadn't known how much. Yet as distant and reserved as he tried to make himself be, he'd involved himself in the lives of others without hesitation at times. That reservation had broken when he'd saved Liz Parker's life at the Crashdown Cafe almost 2 years ago. The image of Liz falling back when the gunman's bullet struck her still sometimes haunted Max's dreams. He had made a choice that day to use his powers to heal her and had thrown them together and apart ever since. Opening the Cutlass's door, Max stepped out into the oven heat that settled over the harsh land. The slow tickling of the cutlass's cooling engine sounded loud in the silence of the village. A child wrapped an arm around her mother's leg and retreated behind the woman. 3 Mesalico men in jeans, t-shirts, and sweat-stained denim shirts with the sleeves hacked off were putting a new roof on a community building. Although none of them spoke, the 3 men rose as one and stepped over the edge of their single-story building. Their boots thumped against the alkaline ground when they landed. Then they headed for Max. Max held his ground and watched them approach, even though he wanted to get back into the cutlass and leave. He watched the men stop just out of arm's reach, forming a semicircle around him. "What are you doing here?" one of the men demanded. He was Max's height and slim build, but his arms and shoulders showed musculature from long, hard hours of manual labor. He kept a roofing hammer in one scarred hand. "I was invited," Max said. He had to push the words out. From past visits to the reservation, he knew that the Mesalico tribe didn't much care for outsiders, and cared even less for anyone connected to the legends of the visitor that had arrived in the fateful spaceship crash in Roswell in 1947. "Who invited you?" the man demanded. "River Dog," Max answered. "The messenger had found him only a short time ago in Roswell." "I didn't know anything about this," the man said. Max nodded. "I'm sorry. He shouldn't be here," one of the other men declared. "We could make him leave," the third man suggested. Anger surged through Max. The emotion was raw and vibrant, something new that had become part of him after losing his son and seeing Liz with Kyle. "I'm not leaving," Max said in a low voice. The man holding the hammer stared at him, his face as cold and still as marble. "Maybe you won't have a choice, boy." One of the men standing to the side took a step, moving farther behind Max. Max resisted the impulse to step back toward the cutlass to prevent them from circling him. For a moment he realized the rebelliousness that filled him was something he would have expected from Michael. A dog started barking excitedly. Running footsteps echoed between the small dwellings. A moment later, a young girl with feathers and turquoise twisted into her braids ran toward them. She wore khaki hiking shorts and a lavender spaghetti-strapped tank, and couldn't have been more than 10 years old. "George Greyhawk," the young girl called out. "River Dog is waiting for this man." Greyhawk, the man with the hammer, gave ground reluctantly at the little girl's approach. The speckled hound kept pace with her, continuing to bay eagerly. This little girl stopped in front of Max, looking him over from head to toe as if he were a lab specimen. "You are Max?" she asked. "Yes," Max answered. The little girl reached up tentatively and took Max by the hand when he didn't come immediately. "My name is Sarah Swiftfox. You don't have to be afraid." "I'm not afraid," Max said, getting into motion, following Sarah past Greyhawk and the other 2 men. "Yes, you are," Sarah replied, glancing over her shoulder. Do children always know the truth, Max wondered. The possibility was something to think about. When his son met him again, and Max was somehow certain that would happen, would he believe the story Max told him about why he'd stayed behind instead of leaving with his mother? He let out a breath, realizing that his son might believe him, but the real question was whether he would understand. The dog trotted along beside Max and Sarah as the little girl led the way out of the village and up into the surrounding hills. The sun burned down against the scorched earth. Here and there, Max could spot runnels and washes left over from the heavy rains 3 days ago. But they were all dried out now, leftover scars the dry wind would soon rake smooth again. The bright purple, white, red, and yellow blooms of the various cacti spread across the cracked earth were still open at the moment. Sarah stopped and pointed. "There's River Dog." Following the line of her finger, Max spotted the shaman seated cross-legged on a blanket facing the rising sun. The shaman wore traditional dress complete with symbols painted on his chest, arms, and face. Unease rattled through Max's mind. "Is something wrong with him?" he asked the girl. Sarah wrinkled her face as she watched the shaman. "I don't know. He hasn't told me anything was wrong." "Why did he send for me?" Max asked. The speckled hound whined for the girl's attention. "I don't know." Sarah knelt and took the hound's muzzle in her hands. The animal ceased whining and lapped at her face. "Our stories, the legends of the people, often say that 2 people who are incomplete, each with his or her own problems, often find ways to help each other." She stood. "I can see that you have problems of your own. Maybe that was what River Dog was thinking when he sent for you. I hope it's true." "Me too," Max said. One of the avenues he'd intended to explore to help him find his son had been the Mesalico shaman. He had just hadn't known how River Dog was going to do that, and he hadn't been ready to tell the shaman what was going on. River Dog had helped them discover the healing stones in Nasato after a fashion, but he hadn't been entirely supportive either. River Dog's comments to Liz had shown that. Still, the shaman had helped when Michael had gotten sick. Max turned back to the girl, intending to thank her. Instead, he saw Sarah halfway down the hillside with the speckled hound at her side. Resolutely, Max turned back to the shaman and crossed the ridgeline. His shoes crunched through the baked surface of the hillside. Only a few feet from the shaman, quick movement darted through rocks and small, barrel-shaped pear cacti. Max tried to track the movement, catching a glimpse of a silvery blur that disappeared into the cracked earth. In the next instant, a wall of air slammed into Max hard enough to make him stumble. He straightened, turning into the wind and facing in the direction of the rising sun. Hooves drummed the ground with deafening loudness. The wind had whipped up a yellow alkaline dust cloud from the hillside, then swept the mass toward the ridge where Riverdog sat. The sound of the hooves grew louder. The dim outline of a horse and rider formed in the dust cloud, gaining speed till the animal and man burst free of the swirling haze. A Native American warrior sat atop the charging horse. Both man and animal were marked with war paint. The warrior wore a breastplate made of bird bones and a rawhide loincloth. Eagle feathers stood up from his war bonnet. A leather shield covered his left arm, and he carried a feathered war spear in his right. Without breaking stride, the mounted warrior screamed in angry defiance and rode straight for Riverdog. He drew the war lance back smoothly, arm muscles rippling, as he prepared to throw the lethal weapon.
Chapter 3 Shades. Standing in front of the mirror in her room, Liz Parker took stock of her image. Okay, so do I look like somebody barely holding it together here? Like somebody one short step from the edge? The questions were fair ones. How many people could keep it together and face what she was facing? The whole "your boyfriend is an alien" thing had been a real stretch for the last year and a half, especially helping him seek out his home world. But coupled with the fact that Max had also fathered a child with someone he'd been married to in another life, someone who turned out to be the murderess of one of Liz's best friends, was more than anyone should have to handle. And that's the real choice, isn't it? Liz asked her reflection. To deal or not to deal. Working out a relationship is hard between two normal people. An image flashed into her mind, reminding her how she'd handle Max's decision to return to his home world in the Granolith only a few short days ago. They'd sat in the Jeep in front of the Crashdown Cafe. I wish this all could have been different, Max told her. I wish that so much. Then he leaned in and kissed her, and the familiar weirdness of the kiss had slammed through her. Then when he pulled back, she looked at him, not knowing what to do, feeling tense between them. I guess that this is our goodbye, she said. Then she'd asked one of the most frightening and difficult questions she'd ever asked. Just tell me one thing. Do you love her? Max hadn't hesitated. Not like I love you. Liz had almost stayed with him then, but she hadn't been able to. She'd been a mass of confused emotions barely contained. Leaving him there and walking into the Crashdown had taken all her strength, all of her nerve, and she clung desperately to the hurt that his words had brought her. Tears burned, brimming at the back of Liz's eyes. She steeled herself, holding the helpless emotion back. She couldn't lose herself in Max Evans again. She wouldn't allow herself to be lost again. She crossed the room, barely aware of the music streaming from the radio by her bed. She glanced at the clock and discovered she had only minutes to make it to work on time. The good thing was that she worked in the cafe downstairs. The bad thing was that the cafe was downstairs all the time. She could be called in to work at a moment's notice. Her folks usually didn't do that, but the opportunity existed. Trying to get focused again, Liz grabbed her apron and order book and left her room. Out in the hallway, she heard voices. At first, she thought perhaps her mother and father were in the living room talking. Then she realized her father wouldn't have been home unless something was wrong. Only feeling a little guilty about eavesdropping because she was worried, Liz moved to the door of the small kitchen the Parker family maintained above the cafe. She hadn't heard anyone enter the family dwelling area, and despite the muffled noise from the business below, she usually could. I know something is going on, Nancy Parker was insisting. Liz hasn't been herself for weeks. Liz's heart leapt into her throat. She'd known her parents were aware that she was having a difficult time, but if they were going to talk about it, that meant they weren't far from trying to do something about the situation. What could they do about her problems? My boyfriend is an alien, not exactly typical Oprah stuff, Liz thought. Things are complicated enough. The last thing I need is for my parents to get involved. Of course I know I have to do something, Nancy Parker said. Liz listened to the hard edge in her mother's voice. The tone was one she'd seldom heard over the years, and generally only when talking about her mother, Liz's grandmother. The relationship between the two women had been strained, and Liz had only learned a little of the history during brief conversations between her mom and dad. I will do something, Nancy replied in a strained voice. You've always accused me of putting things off, and you've been wrong. Mother, I don't want to talk about this anymore. A cold chill filled Liz. Her maternal grandmother had passed away years ago. No, Mother, Nancy said. I'm not avoiding the issue. Liz drew back from the door. How could her mother possibly be talking to her grandmother? Of course I love Liz, Mother, Nancy responded angrily. Nancy Parker responded angrily. The fear inside Liz intensified. Chill out, she told herself. There has to be a reasonable explanation. I'll tell you what I'm doing for her, Nancy Parker snapped. I'm giving her the space she needs to sort things out, Mother. That's something you never quite understood about me when I was growing up. I respect the space Liz needs. Pots clanged on the stove inside the kitchen. Lauren, I had to mute you because I could hear your background. Pots clanged inside the kitchen. No, Nancy Parker roared over the clatter of pots and pans. Don't you dare say that, Mother. Don't you? Unable to stay on the other side of the door while her mother went through whatever she was going through, Liz pushed through the door. Her mother stood by the stove. She looked over at Liz, then blinked as if dazed. No one else was in the room. Hi, Liz, Nancy Parker said. She glanced out at the frying pan and saucepan she held, as though surprised to see them. Other pots and pans cluttered the stovetop and counter space. Evidently, the conversation had been going on longer than Liz had heard, because her mom had taken a number of dishes, pots and pans, and other cooking utensils from the cabinets and strewn them about. Hey, Mom, Liz said. She wanted to say more, but she couldn't. How's your sanity today? Was a question that she just couldn't ask. Just dropped in for a reality check. That wasn't any better. Nancy Parker checked the clock on the stove as she carefully put the two pans down. You're late. I'm headed down now, Liz said. An unaccustomed chill filled the room, but she figured that the window had been left open. Roswell was always hot by noon, but sometimes the coolness from the desert night took a while to burn away. Her mother must have left the window open. Did you need something? Liz froze for a moment. Nope, she answered. I heard you talking in here. I wasn't talking. Liz stared at her mom. Okay, maybe I left the radio on in my room and I thought it was you. Nancy Parker smiled. Maybe we should have your hearing checked. My hearing is fine, Liz thought, but she said, is there anything you need before I go downstairs, I mean? No, thanks. Where's Dad? I don't want to nag, Nancy Parker said, but you're late. Maria and Michael are depending on you to get ready for the lunch crowd. I know, on my way. Liz walked to the door and glanced back at her mother. Nancy Parker looked in perplexed confusion at the pile of pots and pans and dishware in front of her. Mom, Liz said. What? Her mother seemed preoccupied. You'd talk to me if you needed to, wouldn't you? Liz asked. I mean, if anything was wrong? Nancy Parker stared at her daughter quietly and smiled. Of course I would. Just like you talked to me if something was going on in your life that you needed help coping with. Liz returned her mom's look for a moment and felt incredibly guilty. She had hardly told her mother anything about the last year and a half. Sure, Liz said, starting through the door. If something comes up, just keep in mind that I'm around, okay? I will, her mother promised, then began putting the pots and pans away. Uncertain and still feeling a little unsettled, Liz pushed for the door. One of us is losing it, she told herself. Part of her was afraid that person was her, not her mom. As the door closed, Liz thought she saw a silvery metallic flash in the kitchen. She stopped and opened the door again, looking around the room. Nothing silvery caught her eye, but she was certain she'd seen something. Liz, I'm going, Liz replied. As she pulled her head back, she noticed the cold chill that filled the kitchen. Only then did she realize that the window wasn't open as she thought. That's weird. Without another word, knowing that her mother was on the verge of getting irritated, Liz turned and headed down the hallway. The wrongness of the morning tugged at the back of her mind, the place where she filled all the strange things she'd encountered since getting to know Max Evans. The mounted warrior bore down on Riverdog. Sunlight sparked from the cruel metal blade of the spear's tip as the horse and rider cleared the swirling, dusty fog. Max threw himself into motion. Riverdog, he yelled, afraid he wouldn't arrive in time. The Mesaliko shaman lifted his head, turning to glance at Max. He didn't move from the horse's path. The horse's hooves thundered against the ground, digging up clumps of sandy loam, slicing through cacti. Drawing up smoothly on the horse's back, keeping himself in place with his knees, the warrior issued a feral cry. The war paint marking his features made his threatening expression even harsher. His arm whipped forward as he hurled the spear. In a low, flat drive, Max covered the ground, separating him from the Mesolika shaman. As he thudded into the other man, sending both of them sprawling across the ground, he glimpsed the spear embedding in the ground only inches away. The warrior rode by. The horse's hooves hammered against the ground only inches from Max's head. "What are you doing?" River Dog demanded. Max scrambled frantically, pushing himself to his feet and trying to aid the shaman. "Saving you. There is no need." The warrior reined in his mount, bringing the big animal around in a tight turn that turned up a spray of dust and sand. His angry eyes focused on River Dog. Max glanced at the spear jutting up from the ridge only a few feet away. "He would have killed you." "He can't kill me." River Dog spoke confidently. Max looked around desperately, searching for some way to get them to safety until help could come. Surely the warrior's yells hadn't gone unnoticed by the people in the village below. The painted warrior leveled an accusing finger. "River Dog," he said in a gruff voice, "betrayer of our people." Max glanced at River Dog. "You know him?" "Bear Killer," the shaman answered, nodding and locking eyes with the warrior. "He is my ancestor. He died nearly 200 years ago." Not comprehending, Max stared at the warrior. The painted face looked maybe 20 years old. The warrior kept pointing at River Dog, standing up in the saddle stirrups. "You brought the visitors among us. You are the reason our tribe will finally wither and die after all these years of pain and sorrow." "No," River Dog answered, his voice strong and rolling over the hill. "You should have killed the first visitor," the warrior said. Max guessed that the warrior was speaking about Asato. All those years ago, River Dog had found Asato after the spaceship had crashed in Roswell. River Dog had nursed him back to life and kept the secret about the man's extraterrestrial origins. He'd even been entrusted with the healing stones that Max and the others had later recovered. The painted brave pulled a long-bladed hunting knife from a sheath at his belt. He kicked his horse in the sides, urging the animal into motion, and gave a fierce war cry. Max grabbed River Dog's arm and tried to pull him away. "No," the shaman said, resisting Max's efforts. "He'll kill you," Max said. "No," River Dog insisted. "He can't kill me. There are things going on here that you don't understand." Max accepted that. There were a lot of things about his life that he didn't understand. "Release me and step away," River Dog commanded. Max hesitated. "Do it now," River Dog said. Knowing that he could never budge the man in time if he resisted, Max released his hold on River Dog and moved away. Panic welled inside him as he watched the mounted warrior ride straight for the shaman. River Dog never flinched. The shaman stood his ground. As the warrior and horse closed in on him, River Dog held his arms up at his side. In one fist, he clutched a turquoise necklace. In the other, he held eagle feathers painted red and white. He broke out a native song, the cadence rolling amid the noise of the thundering hooves. In stunned fascination, Max watched as the warrior and horse disappeared inside River Dog. Horse and rider vanished like a mirage, fading out of existence. The dust cloud that the horse's hooves had turned up rolled over River Dog. Then an electric pulse exploded in front of the shaman, strong enough to make Max's hair stand on end. River Dog left his feet and flew backward as if a bus had struck him. River Dog stared up at the cerulean blue sky with unseeing eyes. His body lay relaxed. The sand around him was pristine, smooth as new-fallen snow. Max guessed that the force of the warrior and horse disappearing had blown the sand smooth. Fearing the worst, Max put his fingers against the side of the shaman's neck. There was no wounds on the man's body, not even a bruise, but there was also no pulse. Right, that was chapter 3, so we're on to chapter 4, which is Miss Alison.
All right. The electrical discharge must have stopped his heart, Max reasoned as he stared down at River Dog, struggling to control the panic that threatened to engulf him. His own body still tingled with the ionized force that continued to dissipate. Frantic, knowing that he was working against the clock, that every second River Dog's heart refused to beat was causing the shaman's body to shut down. Max laid his hand on the man's chest. He felt for the warmth, for the connection that would bind him to River Dog. He shifted his hand, sliding his palm over the area where he thought the heart would be. Feeling the power building within him, Max pushed the force through him, willing River Dog's heart to resume beating. At first, he was afraid that his efforts weren't going to be enough. that he was going to be left there with River Dog's corpse. Then, intermittent at first, like a worn starter dragging on a cold morning, River Dog's heart lurched into an irregular beat. Max felt the uneven thumping vibrate against his palm. Come on, Max thought fiercely. Breathe. Suddenly, River Dog's mouth opened, and he took a ragged breath. Lifting an arm, he seized Max's wrist in his hand. Enough, River Dog gasped hoarsely. Max allowed his hand to be taken away. River Dog glanced around. The rider? He's gone, Max said. We've got to go. He stood and offered his hand. River Dog pushed himself into a sitting position, but ignored Max's hand. No. Max looked around, listening to the lonely echo of the wind sailing across the harsh land. Tall chaparrals stood in places, leaving only short, blunt shadows that looked gray against the sand instead of black. Vultures circled the sky. Are you sure the rider won't be coming back? Max asked. River Dog looked at him. It doesn't matter where we go, he said softly. Bear Killer will come for me again when he wants to. Turning, Max swept the land around them with his gaze. He could see for what looked like miles. How had the warrior ridden up on them on horseback without being seen? How can he be 200 years old? Max asked. He's not 200 years old, River Dog said. He hardly looks more than 20. He died in battle with a tribe who was our enemy at the time. 200 years ago? About that. Max grew irritated at the quiet calm the shaman exuded. The sun beat down on him. Off in the distance, tiny swirls of rising heat created near mirages. How is he here now? It's part of an ancient prophecy, River Dog answered. That's why I asked you to come here. What prophecy? The shaman waited a moment. That one day the dead would rise and punish the living, River Dog answered. Liz hurried among the tables as the lunch crowd continued descending on the Crashdown Cafe. With its out-of-this-world decor, the Crashdown Cafe was one of the local tourist attractions. Ideally located near the center of town, local business people and employees ate there, sharing tables with the tourists who came in to gawk at the sights. Hey, waitress, a truck driver with an Atlanta Braves baseball cap called. I'd like a refill on this tea sometime today. Liz glanced at the man. Civil, she told herself. Just be civil. The clock is ticking and the shift will be over, and being civil means bigger tips. Yes, sir, she replied, putting on a smile that was just as plastic and phony as one of the Art Deco rocket ships hanging on the wall. She snagged a bottle of ketchup from the empty table she passed and dropped it off at a table of teenagers who had already gone through 2 bottles. They didn't even look up to acknowledge her. Terrific. If I can't get to something someone needs, everybody sees me. But the minute I get something right, it's like I'm the invisible girl. Liz took a deep breath and let it out. She was experienced enough not to take too much to heart. She managed to take another order, a family of 5 with something special on each entree, then swept back toward the server's table to grab a pitcher of tea. Maria was already there, stuffing her apron pockets with sugar and sweetener packets. So, Maria said, do you think your mom is going to become a basket case? That's real tactful. Liz stuffed another handful of paper-wrapped straws into her apron. Maria glanced knowingly at the nearly filled-to-capacity restaurant. We don't exactly have time for tact. She took a pot of decaffeinated coffee from the warming plate. So we can either talk about the situation or we can ignore it. Without another word, she stepped back into the dining area amid an immediate flurry of calls for her attention. Liz attached the latest order to the spinner, bolted on the pass-through window. Michael, dressed in an apron over jeans and a t-shirt, wielded a spatula and tongs with grim efficiency. He flipped a half-dozen burgers, then lifted a basket of fries from the deep fryer, swatted the annoying beeping timer in one move. How about that order? Liz asked, flicking one of the tickets with her forefinger. Michael shook the basket of fries. You know I'd be a lot faster if we didn't have to involve this whole cooking thing. Good plan, Liz said, then off a second look. No. Michael shrugged and dealt cheese out onto burgers like playing cards. Hey, what? A look of concern lighted Michael's face. Is your mom gonna cave? Choking back a harsh reply, Liz grabbed the order sitting in the pass-through window and went back out into the dining area. She passed the food out, then noticed the truck driver raising his arm again. Retreating back to the wait station, she retrieved a pitcher of tea and managed the refill. Taking out her order book, she seated 3 regulars at a back table, one step behind the young busboy her dad had hired for the summer. The tabletop still glistened from Ethan's towel. After getting the drink order, which she thankfully knew by heart, she got the beverages delivered. Grabbing a bus tub from the end of the counter, Liz quickly went to one of the tables. As Liz scooped up 3 glasses in each hand and placed them within the tub, Maria joined her. Look, I can tell you're upset. Maria rounded up the silverware and shoved the utensils into one of the drink containers. Maybe later will be better. You told Michael? Oh, that. Liz finished the table and picked up the bus tub. My bad, Maria said, following Liz through the tables again. It's just that it's easier to talk about somebody else's problems than ours. Glad to know I could help. Come on, Liz, you want to talk about this, Maria said. I know you do. It's eating you up. The truth was, Liz's concern over her mother had gotten worse. Usually her mom came down to make sure the hectic lunches went well. Today, there had been no sign of Nancy Parker. Liz couldn't help wondering if her mom was still upstairs talking to herself. The image hurt and confused her, and it made her angry. Maybe saying anything to you was a mistake, Liz said, turning from her friend. After all, Maria was still one of the friends of the happy little alien living secretly in Roswell. Maybe she complained about relationship issues with Michael, whose very human faults seemed more to blame than any extraterrestrial ones. But she remained in the thick of them, not like Liz. Talking to me is never a mistake, Maria said. Look, maybe there's a reasonable answer for why your mom was having a conversation by herself this morning. What? Maria sighed. I don't know, yet. Liz went over to the serving window to check on her orders. Maria followed, catching up with her at the window. We'll figure this out, I promise. Overhearing them, Michael turned from the flat grill. Figure what out? What's up with Liz's mom? Maria frowned and shook her head. I really shouldn't have told you. Michael looked at Liz, then back at Maria. You barely mentioned it, he said in a monotone. Neither Maria nor Liz spoke. Doesn't that help? Michael asked. No, Liz and Maria told him at the same time. I've got a right to know about your mom, Michael said, defensively. How do you figure? Liz demanded. I work here too. Michael shook his spatula at the frying burger patties. I depend on this job. Without this job, I have no house. Without a house, I'm sleeping in a cardboard box. He shook his head defiantly. And I'm not sleeping in a cardboard box. You don't have to worry about that if your mom is headed for the Looney Hotel and the crash down closes down. Liz couldn't believe Michael could be so insensitive, even after everything they'd been through together, after everything she'd already seen him do. Look, Michael said, it's not like I'm going to run out on you. If you need help, you know a place to crash for a couple days. Somebody to help subdue your... Get there. I'll be there for you. Gee, Liz said sarcastically, that's awfully sweet of you. Michael shook his head in disgust. There's about 1 million guys out there who wouldn't offer to help you subdue your mom without hurting her. The sad part was Liz realized Michael was right. She and Maria took their orders out to their respective tables. Several minutes passed as she gathered new orders and refilled drinks. One of the things that bothered her the most, Liz admitted, was that Max was out there somewhere and didn't even have a clue that she was having trouble with her mom. Only a short while later, after a flurry of drink refills and condiment requests, Maria and Liz stood at the pass-through window again. Liz wished the lunch business would hurry and die down so she could go check on her mom. I've got an idea, Maria said. Liz didn't want to ask. What? How much do you know about the Crashdown Cafe? A lot, Liz answered. Was this always a restaurant? Maybe, Liz answered. I think so. What difference does it make? Maybe someone died here, Maria said. Maybe the restaurant is haunted. Haunted? Liz couldn't believe Maria was serious. Do you think my mom was upstairs talking to a ghost? Maria took a step back and frowned. It's better than you thinking she's gone totally whack. I don't think that, Liz objected, feeling guilty because those thoughts had been in her mind. Thinking my mom is talking to a ghost isn't exactly a 180-degree turn on thinking she's wigging out. Maria shrugged. Depends on whether you believe in ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts, Liz said. Anyway, my mom wasn't talking to the ghost of a previous occupant. She was talking to my grandmother. Maybe ghosts attract ghosts, Maria said. Maybe there's a poltergeist loose in the crashdown that has drawn your grandmother's ghost here. We've been here for years, Liz said. Why would she suddenly start turning up now? Maria frowned, her brow furrowing. I don't have all the answers. Some of this still needs to be worked out. Ghosts don't exist, Liz said. Michael said, bringing plates over to the pass-through window. They do. I saw one. What? Maria exploded. You saw a ghost and you never told me? Michael looked at her. Didn't know we were supposed to share otherworldly experiences. Anyway, you weren't really big on discussing anything I did last week. You were kind of mad at me for being gone. The geological survey, Liz said, remembering. She'd had to help cover Michael's ships last week. Yeah, Michael replied. You were there with Tiller Osborne, Maria said. Michael nodded. I heard somebody saying something about him seeing his father's ghost. He did, Michael said. And that was the ghost you saw, Liz asked. Yeah. Michael turned back to the grill and started laying out the next orders. Meat sizzled on the grill. Those orders are ready. Wait, Maria said. You can't just say you saw a ghost and then walk away. Tell us the rest of it. That is the rest of it, Michael insisted. The ghost was there and then it was gone. And it was Tiller's dad, Liz asked. Michael nodded. Looked like him to me. Tiller thought so. The experience messed him up pretty bad. We brought him back into Roswell the next day and left him here. Has he seen the ghost since? Liz asked. Somehow the whole story sounded just too bizarre to believe. But after everything she'd been living through the last year and a half, maybe the ghost tale didn't sound as far-fetched as it should have. I don't know, Michael answered. We don't hang. And you don't think you should check on him? Maria asked. No, I'm a guy who he worked with for a day. Somebody he sees in the hall occasionally. I figure he wants his privacy about now. Does he know you saw his father's ghost? Michael laid the hamburger buns down on the grill to toast. No. Why not? He didn't ask. Michael used the toasted buns and assembled hamburgers with passionless expertise. You didn't tell him? No. Why? Michael piled fries on the plates, pushed them through the pass-through window. Nobody else saw the ghost. If I told Tiller that I'd seen the ghost, maybe he would have thought about it and decided I was lying, in which case he might want to punch me out. If he believed me that I had seen the ghost and no one else had, then he might have started figuring that something was different about me. He eyed Maria. I'd kind of rather he didn't go there, you know. Liz's mind spun and tumbled with the thoughts, having to choose between two evils, her mom talking to herself or her mom talking to a ghost. Liz really didn't know which she'd have preferred. What did the ghost want? She asked. I don't know, Michael admitted. The ghost didn't talk or anything. It just rushed at Tiller and drew down a lightning bolt that scattered Tiller, Bulmer, and me. You were nearly hit by a lightning bolt? Maria asked. Michael realized there was a near-death by lightning footnote she hadn't been aware of as well. It was nothing, Michael said. The bolt knocked the three of us off our feet. That's all. He nudged the plates forward. Better get these out before we get mobbed. Maria sighed in disgust as she gathered her orders. We're not done here. Michael nodded. Kinda got that. Liz lagged a half step behind, waiting till Maria left. Have you ever seen ghosts before? Liz asked in a low voice. No. Maybe this is a new power manifesting, Liz suggested. During the time that she'd known Max, Michael, and Isabel, their powers had become stronger. Michael shrugged and started cleaning the grill. Maybe it was just something that happened because we'd been telling ghost stories and the storm settled in. Maybe I didn't see anything after all. Balancing 5 plates on the round server tray, Liz turned toward the dining room again. When she finished delivering the order to the waiting table, Liz retreated to the wait station for the tea pitcher and coffee pot. Maria joined her just a moment later. Can you believe Michael? Can you believe that he'd see a ghost and not tell me about it? I don't think he's sure he saw a ghost, Liz said. What about the lightning bolt? Coincidence. Around those three? No way. The ghost was Tiller's father, Liz pointed out, not anyone Michael knew. Look, after the shift finishes today, Maria said, then glanced out at the dining area. Okay, if this shift ever ends, we'll check around with the realtor and some of the other business people along the street who were here before you and your parents were. Maybe something happened here. What? Liz asked. A murder. Maria looked at her. You think I'm being overdramatic? Yes. Then we can keep the operative theory that your mom is wigging out. Liz grimaced. Okay, we'll ask around, but I think there has to be a more reasonable explanation for... Car horns blared outside the restaurant on the street. Glancing up, Liz watched as a thin scarecrow of a man darted across the street out in front of the Crashdown Cafe. She recognized the man as one of the town regulars. Leroy Wilkins seldom stepped in at the Crashdown Cafe to eat, but he dropped in often for a cup of coffee and to exchange gossip. Thin and wiry, on the edge of looking emaciated, Wilkins was supposed to have been some kind of prospector back in the 60s and 70s. His hair and long gray beard stuck out in several directions. He wore faded and patched jeans, a flannel shirt in the same dire degree of wear, and a battered cowboy hat that might have once been black but now carried an indelible patina of desert sand. More honking shrilled in the wake of Wilkins' frantic run crossing the street. An SUV couldn't stop soon enough. Tires shredded the pavement. The SUV rocked forward, catching Wilkins before he was able to get clear. Wilkins sprawled across the front of the SUV for a moment, looking like the fresh kill proudly shown off by a mechanical predator. Shoving from the SUV, Wilkins got up again and ran toward the Crashdown Cafe. He reached the door, wheezing, his face mottled red from exertion. Instinctively, Liz looked behind the man. Anyone running like that was being chased by someone or something.